This is December 31st, New Year's Eve, 1984. This is my grandfather talking about Christmas and his childhood.
Well, David, here you are, 9 years old, and this is our 9th Christmas together. And it has, have brought a lot of joy to our Christmas this year, 1984. I can remember when I was about your age up in Arkansas. We didn't have big Christmases like we do here, but we did have snow, and we had a Christmas tree at the schoolhouse and at the church, and we'd hang up our stockings at night, at Christmas Eve night, and get some presents. And that was about all we saw for Christmas. We always enjoyed seeing the snow and having a Christmas tree at the community Christmas tree. And what would you like to know about what I did when I was
Well, like when you're in your youth age, did you you said it snowed. Did you have snowball fights and?
Oh yes, we had snowball fights, and I remember when the first snow always came. Now I'm number 5 of 9 children in my family, and we'd all dare each other to run around the house barefooted in the first snow that we had, and that was always a lot of fun. If anybody could go around more than once, well, they'd be the winner, and that was always a big occurrence when we had the first snow. And I don't think you've had very many snows where you live, have you?
One.
And we'd skate on the pond. We had a stock pond out on the farm, and it'd freeze over, and we'd go out and skate, do those things. We never had all the toys like you have. Pretty well just had get an orange and an apple and a few things in our sock.
What,
And some new clothes sometimes.
What kinds of toys did you get?
Not many toys. We didn't have too many.
What were some of them?
Oh, we might have a cap pistol, a little cap pistol with caps and shooting, and a few firecrackers and something to make a little noise out in the country. That's about it. Wasn't anything like this. We didn't have a lot of money to spend for toys. And there wasn't very many to buy then. And you realize that back then they didn't have as many things. Of course, we lived out in the country too. In the town, we didn't live very close to a big town.
What did you do for school? Did you
Well, this first school that I went to was out at a little schoolhouse out in the country called Rocky Point. And we'd have 8 grades and all in one big room and one teacher. And that's where we learned up until...
Did you have a big furnace in the middle of the room?
We had a big stove, and we'd build fire and have cut wood. They'd bring wood in, and we'd build a fire and heat the whole school. Have to sit around it when it got real cold because it didn't heat up the whole room. And
But you didn't have any computers or anything?
no computers and no typewriters, and not much of anything like that.
Did you use had they discovered a regular pencil, or did you have to use...
Oh, we had pencils, yeah.
Did you have to use the ink pens?
Well, I don't remember writing much with ink pens till I got up in the 8th grade, maybe in 9th grade, high school. But school wasn't like it is now. And when I was in about the 6th or 7th, I got through the 8th grade, I went to a consolidated high school.
What was that?
That's where all the communities sort of go together and have one big high school. And I rode it was supposed to be a bus, but it was just a big truck with a tarp over it and some seats built in it. And I'd walk about 2.5 to 3 miles to catch that bus to go to school. Then we'd go about 12 more miles and I'd be at school. And usually you'd have to get up about daylight to take off.
So it ended up about 15 miles?
Yeah, about that far at least. Rough roads, no paved roads.
What all did you do, like, when you worked on the farm and stuff?
Well, on the farm we had horses and cattle. We had mostly dairy cattle. And I learned how to milk cows by the time I was your age, and I could get on my horse and go out and drive in the cows.
Did they have, like, tractors back then?
I didn't have any tractors on that farm. It was a pretty hilly farm. The hills were so steep that there's a story told that a man fell out of his field up there one day. Right in the middle of it. Said the guy got up out of the middle of the road and he says, "Doggone it," said, "that's 3 times I fell out of that field today."
But, like...
Well, we had milk, had a bunch of dairy cattle, and we had our horses to ride, and when I was quite a bit older, well, we had, of course, there was 9 children, and my mother and dad, and my granddad lived. My grandfather, True Blood, lived with us, and of course, when we'd go somewhere, well, my dad bought a T model Ford, and it was about a 1923, I think it was. And when we'd go, we couldn't all ride in the car, so several of us would get on horses and ride. And we'd go across country, and we'd get there about the time the T model Ford did.
Wasn't that one of the first cars that Ford ever made?
Mm-hmm. This T model was the first Ford that Henry Ford made. And we rode our horses a lot. It was a lot of fun. And sometimes we'd have to ride behind the saddle. My older brother would be in the saddle, and I'd ride behind the saddle. And we'd get...
What were like the names of your brothers and sisters?
Well, my oldest brother's named Eckel, and then I had a sister just younger than he was, and her name's Ethel. And then Carl was the next brother. He's the 3rd one. And then Merle was my sister, just older than me. And then I was number 5. And then I had Mildred was my sister, just younger than me. Now, she died when we were in high school. And then I had brother Burl and Buell, and then Lee. And Lee's the one that lives at Sherman. He's the head of the economics department up there.
He's the youngest?
He's the youngest. Mm-hmm.
And about the time that we're talking about right now, about how old was the oldest and about how young was the youngest?
Back then? Well, we were all just a year and a half or 2 years apart. And so that...
so it was...
My father lived, he wasn't 50 when he died.
So, like, it would probably be the oldest would be about 12 and the youngest would be about 1?
Something like that, I guess, or a little older. And I guess Lee was quite a bit younger. He was quite a bit younger than the rest of them. He was the last one. And he was, pause a minute and think.
Well, like, you said that when you had school, you had, like, a big classroom. But what about, like, college?
Well, when I went to high school, I went the 9th grade down at Everton, Arkansas, which was a little town there close to us. And then when I got to be in the sophomore year, well, I went and lived with my oldest sister. And my younger sister and I lived there for 1 year and went to school at Western Grove, Arkansas. And then when I finished high school there at Western Grove, well, I had decided I'd try to go to college, and I didn't have any money, but I decided if I could find a way to work my way through college, I'd do that. And so when I finally went down to Hendricks College at Conway, Arkansas, I talked to the school people and told them my circumstances, and they said, well, if you could find a place to work for your board and room, we can probably help you with your tuition, and I could work on the campus some and have a job there. So they told me about a man that had a dairy, and of course I'd learned how to milk cows when I was a little boy, and they said if I could get a job with him, he had kept college students to work for the board and room. And so I went over there, and that was in the middle of July, and no, it was in June when I talked to him, and he said, well, right then he had someone, but if he should need somebody, he'd get in touch with me, and I told him where he could find me. And then I had a job on the farm working. I was getting $1 a day in my board for working on the farm. I worked from about sun up to sundown.
When
And then, well, that job played out. I was up at my aunt's, my father's sister, staying for Sunday and going to church, and came back home for Sunday dinner. And just about the time we got through eating our Sunday dinner, well, I looked out and saw a car coming, and it was this man from down at Conway, Arkansas, looking for me, and he wanted me to go back with him to work at his dairy. And that was in the middle of July. So I had to work. I worked for him until school started in September. I worked on the campus in about 7.5 hours for 20 cents an hour. And so I worked up there until school started, and I'd worked out enough money to pay most of my tuition and fees at school. And then I stayed there with them and lived and roomed with their son and worked at the dairy and made from board and room. And I'd walk about, it was about 2 miles from where they lived to the college. And I'd walk that or run a lot of times. And my first class was physical education. And so I tell people that I'd work about 2.5 hours and at the dairy, and then I'd run about 2 miles to get there and take my exercise.
when you say your room and board, what do you mean by a board?
A board was what I eat. That's the food. Your board is the food that you eat, and the room, of course, is a place to sleep. And so I went through into college. That first year, I worked for this guy with the dairy. Mr. Ray was his name, and so after the first year, actually before the first year was up, I decided to move in with 3 other college students. One of them was named Powell Green, and the other, his brother Hilka Green, and another man stayed there with him. The boy, his name was Seawright Stewart. And so we all lived in his house, and Powell Green was married, and his wife was going to do the cooking and keep the house, and we were going to pay for the food that we eat and pay for the house that we rented. And so we'd measure the milk that we'd drink, and so we'd just get about 2 quarts a day, and each one of us would have so much. We'd have oatmeal a lot, and sometimes we'd have eggs and bacon. But we lived on a very small income there. That was the first year I went to college, and then the next year we decided that was a pretty good idea to have a co-op where we could live cooperatively. So we found a big old 2-story house up within just about 2 blocks of the college campus. And so we made arrangements to rent that big house. And the pastor of the Methodist Church, Brother Sam Wiggins, helped us get the house and get some furniture. He got some of the church people to give us beds and chairs and furniture that they didn't need. So we furnished that old house. It would take care of about 20 boys. And then after we got started there, they said, well, they need milk and things like that. So I got a cow and brought it down there from the farm, and I furnished the milk, and I ended up getting another cow. It took 2 cows to furnish all the milk, and I milked those cows and paid and furnished the milk at the house. And then I got me a bicycle while I was there. I learned how to ride a bicycle after I went to college, and so I got me a little milk route. I'd bottle that milk that I had left and take it around to some people that I knew lived in the neighborhood, sell it to them, and sold the milk to the college, to the room where I lived. Sometimes some of the boys in another dormitory would want some milk. They'd call down there, and I'd take them what milk I had left in the bottles, pint bottles. So that's the way I made my money to go to college on. And then finally I got me a job up on the campus cleaning up the library after school was out, after everybody went home from the library at night, about 9 o'clock. and I'd clean up the library and had another boy to help me. He and I would clean up the library, and they'd pay us by the hour to do that. And then I finally got another job on campus of cleaning up the chapel. They'd have chapel about twice a week, and I'd have to clean up that building.
How did you end up as a minister?
Well, I had decided before I even went to Hendrix College that that's what I wanted to do, is to be a minister. I felt that God wanted me to be a minister. So I just got out and I preached a little while I was in high school, out in the communities, in little Sunday schools and places. And then I was going to the Hendrix. It was a Methodist school, and they would give ministerial students their tuition and a lot of their fees. So I was getting some of that because I was studying to be a minister. And I don't.
What did the cows?
Well, anyway, I just when I first started out with just one cow there at the college and co-op house, there was another boy who brought his cow down there, and he and I both were furnishing the milk to the. And this other boy's mother died, and he had to go home, and so he'd also brought some hogs. He had 4 hogs and about 25 chickens, and he was furnishing the eggs. Anyway, when he had to go home, he had these 4 hogs and about 25, 30 chickens, hens, white leghorn hens, and they were laying the eggs. So he didn't have any place to. He couldn't take them with him. He could take his cow back home, but he didn't want to take the hogs and the chickens. So he asked me if I'd buy them from him, and so we agreed on a price, and I bought the 4 hogs and the chickens, and we had a place out there. We kept them in the building, and so I fattened out the hogs. I bought some corn from a farmer out there and fattened them out and fed them scraps from the tables there. And when they got big enough to butcher, I sold them and got my money back. And so I had kept the chickens then until next summer, and I had to get rid of them because I couldn't keep them there in the summer. And so I had those chickens until after he left. Didn't have another cow. Well, I had to go buy another cow. And so one of my friends, he was in charge of the campus up there, and Cecil Grady, he was a good friend of mine, and I worked with him on the campus a lot. So some of his folks out in the country had a cow that would make a good second cow for me. So he took his pickup, and we went out and I bought the cow from the people and brought her back, and so that made 2 cows that I had on the campus, and I furnished the milk with them. And so I went on and kept the cows there till school was, when I finished the year I was finishing. Well, I'd taken some churches that I had, when I was going to school, I took those churches, served way out in the country, and I had to get another boy to help me with my cows while I was gone on the weekends. And so I hired him to help me. But anyway, when I got ready to come down to Dallas to go to SMU, of course I had to sell those cows. I had those 2 cows there, and the district superintendent had a farm, Brother Hayden. He said he'd buy the cows from me, and so he paid me $150 for the 2 cows, and he took them to the farm, and gave me some money to start the seminary on. And so when I come to seminary, well, I'd sold some other cows that I'd had on the farm up at where I grew up, and so I had enough to put $400 in savings when I came down to Dallas, and had some money to buy my clothes and other things like that. So that's the way I got through school. And then when I went to SMU, I got a job in the dining hall, working for my board in the room. So I did that while I was there. And then the next year, there was a building across the street from the SMU that had doctors' offices and other people's offices, and they had an apartment over there. And so I'd made arrangements to get that from after another fellow left, and so I worked in got this apartment over there, and we'd clean those offices. And I got a roommate whose name was George Stewart, and George and I lived together over there in this building, and I always told people that he was my broom mate because we swept together. And so when I got ready to leave SMU, well, in the third year I was over there, I took a church in Longview, Texas, and it was called the 6th Street Methodist Church. And so I would go over there with another preacher one time, and then finally I got a car to drive over there, and it was during that year that your grandmother and I, we were met down at the Highland Park Methodist Church, and so we decided to get married before I left school. And it was in March before I was finished in June, and so we decided to get married in March, and March 28th, and we got married, and I finished up my school, and then we took work in Arkansas, at Huntsville, Arkansas. And I had a 2-wheel trailer and a 35 Chevrolet, and we loaded all of our belongings in that little trailer and hooked it on behind the Chevrolet and drove up to Huntsville, Arkansas. And that was our first job. And I had an old church that was built during the Civil War. It was built out of logs and real wide boards, and had the Masonic Lodge had the upper story. There was a 2-story building, and the church was downstairs. And then they were building us a parsonage when we got there, but they lacked a lot of having it finished. So we lived in a little just a little bitty house up on the hill, and it didn't have a bathroom in it. It had a little outhouse out in the back, and didn't even have a path out there hardly. And so you can imagine your grandmother living in Dallas all of her life, moving up to a little place like that. But we were real lucky that summer. The home demonstration agent was a member of a church there, and she was going to go away for 6 weeks to go to summer school. And so she told us to move in her house until she got back. And so we moved in that house and lived there till she came back, and then we had to move one more time and got into another family, had an extra room, and they let us live in that until they could get the parsonage finished. And we finally got into the new parsonage and got our little furniture that we could get together and lived that way. We stayed in that house then for about 7 or 8 years. That's where your mother was born, up there. Well, we took it over to Prairie Grove, Arkansas, which is about 60 miles from Huntsville. And that's where she was born. Also, your Uncle Jim was born in Huntsville, Arkansas. They had built a hospital by the time he was born. I guess we talked
about okay. Back when there were the 25 or 30 hogs. Back when you were in college?
4 hogs.
And just had 4.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we just had 4.
25 or 30 chickens.
Yeah, there's about 25 or 30 chickens.
What did you use the hogs for?
Well, this boy that brought them there, were going to kill them and furnish the meat, eat the meat at the co-op house. But I decided that wasn't very feasible, so I decided to sell the hogs and just get the money out of them, because I didn't want to butcher try to cure the meat and everything. So I got a chance to sell them.
Like, when you were still in school.
Oh yeah, when we got to Huntsville, Arkansas, the first year I was up there, I decided that we should have some hogs to make our own meat, and so we got 2 pigs. I bought them out in the country from one of the members of the church out there. And I made me a pen and put it down below the church, and it was the kind of pen we could move it around if it got too muddy in one place, so move it. And so your grandmother said, now one thing that you might understand, that I'm not gonna feed those hogs. And so, well, sure enough, we had a revival out in a little country church, and I was going out there every night, and I got sick. I took pneumonia, and I had to go to bed, and had the doctor come. And so the hogs hadn't been fed. So I said, well, I guess I better get up and go feed the hogs. And she said, no, you're not. I said, I'll go feed them myself. So I got up out of bed and watched her walk down there and feed the hogs. This city girl is feeding hogs. And anyway, we went on, and I fattened those 2 hogs that I bought, got them fat, and then we killed them and butchered, got the hams and the bacon and all, and we cured it down in the basement of the parsonage. We had a full basement of the parsonage. So we cured the meat, and so long in early in this, after that, in the spring, my district superintendent, Brother Hook, came over there, and he was telling the people, he said, now you people give this preacher some hams and some things like that. He said, that'll help him out with his salary. And one of the members spoke up and said, now, Brother Hook, he has more hams now than we do. I forgot this.
David, turn it off.
Turned off the chin. During the 8 years that we were at Huntsville, we had some boys that decided they wanted to go into the ministry. And one of them's name was Sammy Oslam. His mother was real active in the church, and his grandfather had been a local preacher up there. And first funeral I had was his grandfather's funeral, Mr. Presley. And this is a real kind of a funny story that happened during that, when I had that funeral. I preached that morning at the church, and then we went home and had lunch, and your great-grandmother was there with us, Ms. Simpson. And she was staying with us that week. I guess, I don't know whether, was your daddy there then? I don't guess he was there, just your grandmother, great-grandmother. Anyway, we went home, and I had to be back at the church just right after lunch. And so I had on a white shirt. I had the only white shirt I had on. And we'd had all our shirts were dirty, and your grandmother hadn't gotten them washed. And so I had on a red tie that I'd been wearing that morning, and so she said, you get that red tie off, you're going to a funeral. And so I put on a darker tie. So I reached up and I pulled my tie. When I pulled my tie loose, I jerked my collar and tore it off on the way back. And there, your grandmother standing there with tears in her eyes and didn't know what to do about it hardly. But your great-grandmother said, get that shirt off and I'll fix it. And so she put it on the sewing machine, sewed it back up, and then I got it back on, got the right tie on, and I got down to the church, and the church was full of people, and people were standing on the outside, and the choir was already there. They'd already gone up, because I was a little bit late. And I marched on up and took my place at the pulpit and gave the sermon on the funeral. And I thought that was a story that your grandmother remembers that one pretty well. But anyway, this Mr. Presley's grandson decided to go into ministry. He'd been thinking that he'd be a pharmacist, and started away to go to school. Then he came back and told me that he wanted to go into the ministry. And so I gave him instructions, and then he helped me around at the church quite a bit. And then it came time to go to college. I told him about my college down at Hendricks at Conway, Arkansas, and he wanted to go there. So I helped him get enrolled down there and helped him get some of his tuition and everything. And so he went to Hendricks that year, and then just the next year we had another young man that decided he wanted to go into the ministry. And he was a senior in high school. He joined the church while I was there. He lived out on the farm, And his name was the same as your name. His name was Howard Cox. And he was always just like a member of our family. He came in, and your mother was just a little girl then, about 3 or 4 years old. Well, before she was about 2 or 3 years old when he started coming up there. And so I believe he brought her a little dog one time, and finally got killed out in front of the house. I ran across the road and got killed, and didn't get to keep it very long. But anyway, Howard wanted to go to Hendrix College too, and he claimed he'd had typing up at the high school, but he didn't learn very much about typing. And I'd put him in my office to do some typing for me, and then I'd come back, and Howard would be in the kitchen washing dishes, and your grandmother would be doing the typing in my office. And so, but anyway, we helped him get through, and after he served a few churches, he got into the Army and was a chaplain in the Army. And that's what he's doing now. He'd be almost ready to retire from the Army. And we think a lot of those two, they were young men when we were there, but they're grown up now.
How did you end up as a school teacher later on?
Well, when we came to Garland, I was at the First Methodist Church in Garland. That's when we first came to Garland. And I was associate pastor and minister of education there. And then I took the Rowlett and Pleasant Valley churches, which is just out of Garland, and we built a new church at Rowlett, and I pastored that church for about 7 or 8 years. And then I came back to Garland as associate pastor at the St. Philip's Methodist Church. And so when I took the Rowlett Church, I left the First Methodist Church. The Rowlett Church and Pleasant Valley Church didn't pay very much. They didn't pay enough for us to live on, so the district superintendent told me that I could do something else to make some money if I needed to, and so I decided to get a teacher's certificate and teach school. And so I had to go back to school with SMU. I went to SMU again and took 21 hours over there of education courses. I took one by correspondence, and the rest of them I got during the summer term. And then I taught school. I started teaching at the middle of the term out at Memorial Middle School.
When you started teaching school, were you still preaching?
Yes, I kept the 2 churches and preached and taught school during the week, and then preached on the weekend. I was preaching at both the churches on Sunday morning. I'd preach at one in early service, and then go to the other one and preach a later service, 11 o'clock service. And then I'd preach at one of them on Sunday night, and then the other one I'd preach the next Sunday night at the other one. And that was how I got. So I taught school for 20 years out at Memorial Middle School, and I preached 26 years full time. And then when I retired from both teaching and preaching.
At the same time?
Well, I retired earlier from the churches, and then taught until I taught 20 years, and that's when I retired. That was 4 years ago.
What did you teach when you were teaching?
Well, I taught social studies for the 7th and 8th grades. I taught Texas history for the 7th grade, and then I taught American history for the 8th grade. And then later I also taught career education for 2 or 3 years. And I taught 6th grade. Then when I retired, I was teaching the 6th grade and the 7th grade. And the 6th grade, of course, they study world history, and that's what I was teaching them.
Why you have been retired? Have you had many hobbies or things?
Well, one of my main hobbies is, of course, doing gardening and growing flowers and plants. And we also have a compost pile. And, anyway, I've been gardening, and I do have a compost pile, which your grandmother doesn't care too much about. I save all the leaves and the grass and keep it out in the compost for about a year, and I use the compost around my garden plants and give some of it to my friends.
I think we've heard,
Anyway,
what all do you raise, such as an animal?
well, I have pretty good luck with tomatoes, and of course I have onions and greens, and we raise cucumbers and peppers. Bell peppers is real good, and pepper sauce peppers. We grow those.
Do you have any pets?
And do I?
Do you have like any pets?
Pets, we have 2 dogs. We have Muffin and Honey, and they're always in the house with us, sit in their laps a lot. They like to be, like it when you come to see us. We always.
Do you do anything else besides
Well, I try
gardening?
to get quite a bit of exercise by walking mostly, and I walk from 2 to 4 miles a day, and I get out to walk. And then I also have enjoyed being a member of the Lions Club, the Garland Host Lions Club, which meets every Thursday, and we have some good programs up there, and I enjoy being with the men. Once a year we have the chicken barbecue, which we usually feed the whole city of Garland, and they come eat barbecue chicken. And we usually make the money to help needy children and things like that. What else was there? On Saturday morning, we usually go out to Circle Grill to eat, and we enjoy that. I usually put on my cowboy boots and my bolo and my cowboy hat. We go out there and join the other cowboys out at the Circle Grill.
Which is probably your favorite? Watching TV or doing housework chores and stuff?
Well, I get to do a lot of the honeydew stuff. You know, it's your grandmother says, honey, do this and honey, do that. I do a lot of that. And then I also like to watch TV quite a bit.
Don't you do a lot of that?
Quite a bit, yeah. I watch TV a few hours a day.
You said you like to watch TV. What all do you like to watch?
Well, we watch the news 3 or 4 times a day, 4 or 5, and then we watch As the World Turns. That's a soap opera, and then I watch the one that's called Capital, and then I believe the other one's Guiding Light. I watch that sometimes, most of the time. And I watch Dallas and Falcon Crest, and
is that on Friday nights or Thursday?
It's on Friday night, and then we watch one show called Hotel. We like that pretty good. Dallas. Oh yeah, we like Dynasty on Wednesday night. We watch that.
A while back, you were when you were talking about when you were going to college.
They can't hear you if you stay over there.
A while back, when you were talking about when you were in college and stuff, you said that you were singing in choirs. Did you do a lot of singing?
Well, I always enjoyed singing and didn't know very much music as far as reading music, but I sang in the choir in my high school, Glee Club they called it. And then when I was in college, I sang in the college choir some, and then at the church choir there at Conway, Arkansas, First Methodist Church. I sang in that every Sunday and Sunday night, and I always enjoyed that. And then when I went to SMU, when I got down to SMU, I was able to get into the seminary singers. That was a bunch of the men's voices, and we sang a cappella most of the time. We didn't have everybody play the piano, and we sang for different groups with that. And then I also got into the Highland Park Methodist Church Choir and sang down there for about 2 or 3 years, and enjoyed that very much.
Did you ever learn to play a musical instrument?
Not very much. I could harmonica a little bit, but not very much. Never did know.
In this 1984 year, which will be
Well,
over.
you can't. Nobody can hear you over there.
In this 1984 year, which will probably be over in about 4 hours, what all did you get for Christmas?
Well, I'll see. I got some books, which I always enjoy, and I got some weights to carry in my hand to make my heavy hands, and
When you go walking?
yeah, and I got a flashlight that rechargeable battery in it, and let's see, I got a brush to brush my, and I got a belt buckle, which is a bicentennial belt buckle for the Methodist Church from 1784 to 1984, and very proud of that.
What other churches have you liked being pastor?
Well, let's see. Of course, our first church after I finished the seminary was Huntsville, Arkansas. I had all of Madison County up there. And then when we finished there, we came back to Dallas, and I went to the Oak Lawn Methodist Church as associate pastor, and we stayed there 2 years. And then I went to Kessler Park Methodist Church, which is in Oak Cliff in Dallas, and we were over there for a few years. And then I took the church called Cedar Hill out at Cedar Hill, Texas, and I was out there for a while. And we didn't stay there a whole year. But anyway, we went from Cedar Hill, we went down to Beaumont, and Trinity Methodist Church at Beaumont. And we were down there for about 2 years. And then I went to Orange, Texas, and I was over there 1 year, and then came back to Dallas. I went out to here in Garland, Texas, and I was associate pastor at the First Methodist Church in Garland for 2 years. And when I left the First Methodist Church in Garland, I took the Rowlett and Pleasant Valley churches, which that was the last ones I took as full time. And I served those for about 7 or 8 years and built a new church at Rowlett. And then when I left there, I came to the St. Philip's Methodist Church in Garland. And I was there for 1 year as associate pastor. And that was, I retired after I finished serving out there. When we were in Arkansas, at Huntsville, Arkansas, we made friends with a man named Orville Faubus. He had been in the Army and came back home to Huntsville, Arkansas, and bought the county newspaper. It was they printed it once a week. And I wrote a column for that paper every week for several years there. And then Mr. Faubus, then he became, well, he was road commissioner of Arkansas for a few years, and then he became governor of Arkansas. And when he was governor, we had already come to down to Dallas, and so I was real surprised one day when he had his secretary call me and to meet him down at the Baker Hotel. They were having a meeting down there, and so I went down there, and I was seated at the head table with the governor of Arkansas and head of the First National Bank in Dallas and several other important people, and I was real surprised at that. And I always enjoyed meeting Mr. Faubus after that. He came to Garland one time and found out about it and went up and heard him speak at one of the meetings here in Garland.
What about Sue and Jim, your son and daughter? Tell us
Well,
some things about
I'll tell you something about your mother, Sue. When she was about 2 years old, we were in Arkansas at the Huntsville Methodist Church. And one Sunday night, I was preaching away, and your grandmother let Sue walk around between the pews there by her. And all of a sudden, Sue took off and left her mother, and came up to the pulpit where I was, and just got right behind the pulpit. She'd peep around to see where her mother was. And So we finally almost broke up church there, but we finally got her back to her seat, and it was all right. And I remember one thing that happened with your Uncle Jim. After we came to Garland, we were moving from a little house down in one part of Garland out to the first house that we bought on Oreo. And so I put all of her clothes and stuff in the car, and I told Jim to stay with his mother, that I didn't have time to take care of him. And so I got about halfway from the house that we were moving from to the new house, and Jim stuck his head out from behind the clothes and said, "Hello, Daddy." And then one other time, your Uncle Jim, we had an alfia tree out there that had lots of blooms on it, and they'd fall off, and they'd just cover the ground. And so I put your Uncle Jim to raking up those leaves, and those blooms and the leaves, and so he raked them up, and then he came out there and stopped me. I was mowing the grass, and he came out and stopped me and said, "Dad," said, "I found out why George Washington cut down the cherry tree." And I said, "Why was that?" He said, "He had to clean up after it." When your mother was about almost 5 years old, we were waiting for your Uncle Jim to be born. And your great-grandmother, Mrs. Simpson, was up to Arkansas, staying with us, waiting for your Uncle Jim to be born. And so during the time she was there, your mother Sue and I went out in the country, and the man gave us some little chickens, gave us 2 little hens and a little banny rooster. And so we brought them back, and I built a cage for them, a pen. And so we'd been going around, didn't want to say that your grandmother was pregnant. Well, we just say PG and stuff like that. So one of those little hens, after we got them in the pen, laid an egg. And so your mother went and called her grandmother. She called her Nino. Said, "Nino, come out here and see what my little hen's done." And then she came on out and saw what the little hen had done, saw the egg, and then we started back to the house. She said, "Nino," said, "I bet that little old hen was pregnant when we got her." When we were out at Cedar Hill, your mother and your Uncle Jim always looking at the sheep out in the fields and wishing they had a little lamb. So I went out to one of the members of the church that had a bunch of sheep, and he said, "Yeah, he'd give us a little lamb for kids to play with." And so he gave us this lamb, and it was a great big lamb. And we put it back in the backyard. And first thing we had to do is give it a bath. We thought we had to wash it, give it a good bath, and so we gave it a good Tide bath and got it just as white as it could be. And so they'd play with the sheep out in the backyard, but one day it got loose and we couldn't find it, and so we finally found it over at the school. And went over and got him, brought him back. And so they kept the sheep a few weeks, and they decided that they'd rather give it back to the farmer. It was a little too much trouble. We gave him back to the farmer. But we could always go by the sheep farm and see and they could always pick out this little lamb that they'd had because it had a bath, and it was whiter than the rest of the sheep. This little sheep would chase your grandmother when she was hanging out the clothes, and he'd stomp his feet and just make a lot of noise, and our dog didn't much like the sheep either. That old Prince, he was a Pomeranian dog that we used to have.
And I know that you have Muffin now, and before her you had Sissy, but how did you get Sissy?
Well, Sissy was a little Scottish Terrier, a little black dog and a beautiful dog. And your grandmother went over and took care of Bruce, your cousin, Bruce, when your Aunt Mooney was sick, and stayed over there and took care of him about a week. And then when we got through, came back home one day, Mooney went and bought this little Scotty and brought it to your grandmother, she kept it then until she got sick and died.
And
then after Sissy died, Scotty, your mother went down to Houston and found a Muffin, a little schnauzer, and brought her up here to your grandmother, to take the place of Sissy.
And then how did you get Honey?
Well, Honey was, we had Honey before we got Muffin. We had a friend up at Wiley. She had a gift shop, and we went up there right after Christmas one time, and the store was closed, but the lady let us in, and she had Honey's father, which is a beautiful poodle dog, and then she also was keeping her daughter's 2 or 3 dogs, and then she had Honey was just a little puppy, and so I carried Honey around while she was waiting, getting some things for your grandmother to use in her artwork. And then when we got ready to leave, this lady said, "Mr. Van Zant, if you'd like to give this little dog a good home, I'll just give her to you." And so we brought her home, and we've had her ever since.
Your mother.
So when we got Honey at home, we told your mother about her, and so she caught a plane and flew up here to see Honey, all the way from Houston. Well, you was asking about how it was when I was growing up. I remember my mother telling about when she was little. She was 9 years old, at your age. Her mother died, and she had 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and the sisters were 3 years old. They were twins. I think Clara and I think Claude, and then the brothers were Uncle John and Uncle Splint, and they. So my mother always sort of took care of my granddad, and his name was William Trueblood. So he lived with us from the time ever since I could remember. He used to live with us, and he had a store down in Everton, and he'd walk out to the farm, which was about 2.5 miles, and every time he'd come on Saturday night, he'd come out and he'd bring his laundry, and my mother would do the laundry for him, but he'd always have a slicker on it, a raincoat on his arm, and he'd have a little sack in his hand, and in that sack he'd have candy and chewing gum, and that was a real treat for us. We'd all get some candy and some chewing gum when he'd come home every Saturday night. And I can also remember his father, when we'd be working on the farm. My great-grandfather, whose name was Trueblood also, his name was John Trueblood, he would come and eat dinner with us every once in a while. And he'd drive up in his little buggy with 1-horse buggy, little gray mare he drove, and he'd always come there and stay with us. And he lived just a few miles with an uncle, grandfather's brother, and so he'd come every so often and visit with us, though. And also my granddad, I have many things I remember about him. I mean, he's about 65 years old. I remember one time we were pushing the car off to get it started. It wouldn't start, and we was pushing it down the hill a little ways, and he and I pushed him off, and then we were walking back to the house, and I remember I said, "Granddad, I'll run you a race." And we started running, and he ran for quite a little while, but his knees kind of gave way on him, and he fell down. But anyway, he was always very active, and we always enjoyed having him live with us.
Well, like, when you were on the farm, what other things did you do besides, like, milk the cows and stuff?
Oh, we learned how to take care of we learned to take care of all the other animals on the farm, the horses, and we had chickens and turkeys and geese. We had geese to make feather beds. We'd pick the feathers off the geese and make feather beds. and that's what we slept on. And the house that we lived in was up on a hill, very big, way up on top of a hill, and we had the heat that we used. We had a stove in the front room, in the living room, and then we had a kitchen stove where we cooked, and that was the only heat we had in the house. And me and my brothers all had to sleep up in a second story upstairs. I had to go out on the porch and go upstairs and sleep up there. And we didn't have any heat up there at all. And sometimes we'd wake up and it'd be snow on the edge of our bed where it'd blown in through the shingles in the house and all that. So I can remember all of that. And just hold it down a little bit. And mentioning my great-grandfather, when he used to come see us, one thing was I always noticed that one of his arms had been was cut off, and he'd been shot in the Civil War. He fought in the Civil War way back yonder in 1850s and 60s. And he had a long white beard, and then he just had one arm, and he could do a lot with that one arm though. Things that we didn't have when I was growing up, about your age, David, we didn't have radios. I remember we didn't have a radio at our house at all, and we had to go down to the town, which is 2.5 miles. I remember one time hearing the first radio that I ever heard, and had a prize fight on it, and we would go down and listen to things like that. And the telephone was, we got one when I was just probably about your age, and it was call it like a party line, and it has the lines strung through the community, and everybody was on the line. I mean, and sometimes other people could listen in on what you was talking about, and it was called the party line. And with the old phones would ring it, a little crank on the side, and listen, and the lines they just strung them across. They put up posts sometimes they'd put them on the trees and run them across the country, and that was very. And of course we never had electric lights. We used coal oil lamps. And when I went to high school, it was I guess it was my senior year, I lived with a family that they had electricity in the bottom part of the house, but the second story didn't have any electricity, and I lived my room was upstairs, and the only heat they had in the house was a fireplace in the living room. And this man that I lived with, he and his invalid son slept in the living room and had all the heat in there. They'd go to bed about 7:30 at night, and I'd have to go up to my room and light the coal oil lamp and do my reading in bed. And I put on my gloves and my coat so I wouldn't get too cold. I can remember when I was probably just a little older than you, maybe 10 or 11, 12 years old. My dad and I made a trip down into the next two counties on horseback, and we was going out. My dad bought and sold livestock that's the way he made a living, and he'd buy and ship carloads of cattle to Springfield and to St. Louis, and we'd buy the cattle and bring them to the farm and then take them to the railroad and ship them. And so this one time, my dad said he'd let me go with him and take me with him, and he rode our saddle mare, which was a very good saddle mare, but he wanted me to ride a big old mule, great big mule, and we wanted to trade her off. So we had a saddle that my dad had got for me in St. Louis, Missouri. He had sold 2 carloads of cattle and hogs, and somebody gave him a hot check and didn't get his money for a while. And finally he got this little saddle that I used for a long time, and it was real small. And I think he said it cost him $400 on the money that he didn't get back. And so I was riding that big old mule with this little saddle on it, and we took off and rode all day, and we'd stop and look at some cattle, and then we'd wherever we were at night, we'd just stay with the people that were there. They didn't have hotels or motels or anything like that. So we just stay with the people wherever we were when night came. And so we spent about a week just going through the country down there, rounding up and buying cattle. And I know we went to a 4th of July picnic over in a place called Snowball, Arkansas, down in Searcy County. And everybody was there, and my dad said wasn't used to trying to buy any cattle that day from going anywhere else, so we'd go to that picnic, and he could probably buy some cattle from somebody that was there. And they were all having a good time over there and just playing. So that night we rode back over a mountain and went back and stayed with a family back over in a place called Richland down in Searcy County. And then after we'd been down there almost a week, we rounded up, I guess, 50 or 60 cattle that we'd bought and drove them back up to where we lived and put them in the pastures up there. And we'd sell them to ship them out to St. Louis and Kansas City, Missouri. I remember one time, David, when I was gone with my dad to buy some cattle, and he had a truck. It was a 1.5 ton truck, but they weren't much longer than the pickups that you have now. They was just, but they were fixed for cattle to haul them in. So we had a load of cattle, had some cattle in the truck, and we're going up some of those hills in Arkansas. And we'd go up a hill, and those cattle would get back in the back of the truck, and the truck would rear up, and you couldn't drive it.